Welcome to Radiant Moments, a sanctuary where resilience, wisdom, and authentic living blossoms through heartfelt stories and nurturing guidance. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have the honour of welcoming a truly inspiring guest who brings the timeless wisdom of the plant world to guide us back to our life's natural rhythms and creative flow. Tigrilla Gardenia is a nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and passionate advocate for plant wisdom. She beautifully weaves cutting-edge science, deep spirituality, and creative empowerment into her work, with over 25 years across arts, ecology, and community innovation. And as a proud citizen of the eco-spiritual community of Denmark, Tigrilla nurtures multi-passionate creatives and caregivers to confidently live purpose-driven, heart-aligned lives in harmony with nature's intelligence. Tigrilla, I'm truly delighted to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Your journey is nothing short of fascinating, from touring with Cirque du Soleil to working in tech and innovation, and then fully embracing spiritual eco-communities and plant neurobiology. Could you share how this incredible tapestry of experiences first drew you toward plant wisdom and how it shaped your unique approach to helping others to thrive?
I have a pretty strange and unusual background. I did the kind of somewhat traditional thing. My degree is actually originally in music engineering and electrical engineering. So already there I was off the beaten path.
Mm-hmm.
My family kind of wanted me to either be a lawyer or to be an engineer. And I was like, I don't know. We'll see. And so I worked in tech for, as you said, for a long time, for more than 10 years, where I was working with bringing audio and video innovation to the internet. This was like very early times of the internet. So music has always been a very big passion of mine. It's been part of my guiding star. And the idea of how the arts fits into this, going to being part of a music school at a very well-known and praised university where there's so many musicians that have come out of that school, but yet being on the engineering side gave me this opportunity to experience the world through the whole right brain, left brain, and to really see how the arts can help you better understand the logic. We tend to think that they're kind of two separate scapes. They're two separate areas and environments totally. And for me, they've always been enmeshed one in the other. And so fast forward through, as you said, Cirque du Soleil and being a spiritual teacher and ending up in a place like Damanhur, which I lovingly call a cross between Hogwarts and Oz, because that's really what it is. And here I fell in love with something called the music of the plants when I first experienced the plant making music. And basically the music of the plants is a device that allows plants to become musicians. And this part introduced the plants in a way that I could understand, right? I understand music. I understand engineering. I understand what it's like to use technology in order to give an opportunity to experience something that maybe is hidden in a lot of ways. And so this really introduced me to a plant as a living being, not just a resource, not just a decoration, not just something that you see, when you're walking down the street or in somebody's home, but instead a living, breathing being that has their own experiences. And I just fell down a rabbit hole. I wanted to understand where this was coming from. Why is it that this plant is able to use this device to make unique music that I could hear over time, being again a musician, so having a trained ear, I could hear how the plants were modulating the music based on who they had in front of them. And as I started to go deeper into this study, I started to recognize the patterns. I started to get to know plants. I could hear this music and really understand what they wanted to communicate to me. And this opened an entirely different world of understanding that we're surrounded by these beautiful beings all around us, right? They are what has created what we call environment. And yet we think of ourselves as so separate from them. But in reality, while we are very different, we are animal as human beings, and we do there's not like the eyes and the hands and, any of those types of things to recognize it. That doesn't mean that there aren't similarities and that there aren't parts of us that actually reflected back into them. And what going deeper into an understanding of both the biology as well as the spirituality. I mean, if you think about it, plants are the original iconography and original kind of metaphor, but really are they just metaphor that we've heard about since the beginning of time? The Bible talks about the tree of life, the tree of duality, of the tree of good and evil. We have Yggdrasil in Nordic cultures. I mean, every major culture has a tree at its center, and we've always just thought of it as metaphor. But in reality, the more I dive deeper, the more I understand that this isn't metaphor. These are the plants and the beings that have been with us since the very beginning because they were here first.
Yes.
Can have been here to watch the birth of humans and to almost hold us and shepherd us as we pass through our own path. And somewhere along the lines, we forgot that. We disconnected from that. And rather than feel that loving embrace that comes from the plant world, that feeling you get when you're in nature, where you feel safe, where you feel protected, we feel in our city environments fear. We feel this disconnection, which I often refer to as the original trauma that we as humans live, has separated us so far that we think we're dominant, but really we're just alone. And we are not be able to feel consciously. Unconsciously, we do experience it because there's many different studies that talk about, how living near plants actually lowers levels of depression and cortisol and our stress levels and all these types of things, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But the point being is like, the more I went deeper into this relationship, not only was it the happier I was, the happier my life becomes, the more calm, the more connected I feel. But then also the wonder that comes from, my goodness, I've been doing these things in this way because humanity tells me I'm supposed to do it this way. But plants do it this other way. And could that be the better way of doing it? Like, it just opens you to a whole other world of wonder. And it makes you realize that everything that you are is actually natural. And it's not so much about getting rid of things about yourself or changing things about yourself. It's about learning how to master everything that you are.
That is, when you were talking then about the tree of life, and you really do notice in the city, you notice the difference between not having plants at the same density around you as you do in smaller communities. We have agriculture and there's a lot more greenery, and you feel different. I love going for bushwalks. It was something that helps me to feel grounded, and I just feel at peace, and then I feel really recharged. And when you have that absence, it is definitely profound for how you feel internally, how you're processing and things. And you don't realize, because when we go day to day, it's not something that we focus on. It's not something that's brought to our attention until we're talking about how the environment is impacted by the less density of our world. And you were talking about therapy. Blue and green therapy is something so profoundly used here in Australia to help those who have depression, anxiety, and you're prescribed 1 hour of green therapy, which is bush, and 1 hour of blue therapy, which is water. And if you can combine the two with greenery and water, you end up having kind of like a mini reset. And it is prescribed like once a week that you go out and you do this as part of a holistic approach. And it's just not something that's widely spoken about, because at times mental health and connection is like taboo. We don't talk about it. It's there. We know about it, but it's not openly disclosed or discussed in safe spaces. So the connection to the plants feels profoundly grounding, as we've been talking about. And I've seen that through the research that I've done, that you often mention reawakening our inner plantness. Could you unpack what that means, how it supports resilience and creativity for listeners juggling busy and often overwhelming lives where we don't have that space?
Yeah, so this was one of my kind of big aha moments as I started to work closely with the plants. Because as you mentioned, when I first started working with plants, the entryway was that kind of health and wellness perspective. I started off in biomimicry, which is when we look to nature and we mimic the way nature does things in order to improve our human ways of doing things. And with then biophilic design, which is again where we try to introduce elements of nature that are those things that, scientifically speaking, help us feel more connected. For example, if I'm in an office that has artificial light, where that light is direct in any which way, right? Always the same color, always the same intensity, that for my body reacts in a very artificial way. So it actually can affect my mental health in a negative way, as opposed to if I put a pattern in front of it. For example, when I look out and I look at trees, the light dapples through the trees. So the light actually has different shades, it has different movement. And throughout the course of the day, obviously I get different intensities. Right now, where I live in Italy, because we're just heading into autumn, we've moved into autumn and we're kind of getting into moving towards the winter, then the sun is actually lower, so it hits me more direct. I have a window right in front of me and I can see as the sunlight moves across, so it crosses through my face and then it ends up at a window to the side of me. And so then I have this movement. I can very much experience it. That is a natural connected way. It taps into my circadian rhythms. It taps into the way my body produces certain kinds of chemical structures because that light touches me in different ways. And therefore, each one of the plants is growing in their own direction, following that light. And I too, as a being of nature, do that. So I really started with a lot of those aspects where in biophilic design, we try to mimic that, right? Have light that moves. We have green as a color that our bodies react to in certain ways, different shades of green and all those different aspects. So I really did start kind of there and then slowly started moving to a deeper understanding of, well, what is it that's triggering, right? What is it that's touching inside of me? And how do I get that without having to go out to the bush? Because I live in a place that's very like I could walk out and in 5 minutes be in a somewhat wooded area and kind of immerse myself. But not everybody does, right? We live in these city urban environments and we don't want people to feel out of it. And in reality, it doesn't actually take all that much. There's just sitting down in a spot that you create that has grass around you. And like you said, maybe a pond or a river. It is enough to trigger all of these types of feelings. And so I kept going deeper into this. Like, what is it about that connection? How do I get that with houseplants? For example, I work a lot with houseplants because I do work with a lot of people in urban environments and I love working with houseplants. And how is that relationship triggered in all these pieces? And I got to this understanding of this deep plantness, this essence of what it means to be plants. We as humans rely very much on our animalness. Our humanness to me is our culture connected with our way of being. We have this thing that gets created as a culture that brings in a lot of norms and a lot of conditioning and tells us right from wrong, which can be beautiful, but it can also be very stifling. Our animalness is our instinctiveness, or it's our thing that makes us move. It's our thing that has us reacting and also, unfortunately, running away. We as animals tend to run away from our problems. We tend to use our legs a little too much.
Yes,
Our
indeed.
plantness, on the other hand, because again, we evolved from plants. We've been here. Plants have been here since before we even got here. And so our plantness instead is that sense of presence, the sense of stillness, because a plant is rooted, they're sessile into the earth, can't run away, has to deal with your problems. It is the part of me that is full sensor. Like I am here. I am aware. Rather than being overwhelmed by things that I don't understand, instead, when I tap into my plantness, my sensors come alive and I now, at a minimum, know where something's coming from. And if I know where it's coming from, then I can deal with it. I can either shut it down, I can let it in, I can start to attenuate it. So the more you tap into your plantness, the more you get into that sense of presence, that sense of stillness, the sense of being in the present tense. So you use the information of the past to make decisions that are going into the future, but you live in the present. And
Yeah.
that really is the heart of Plantness. And this is something that working closely with plants, we have an opportunity to understand. And what I love is taking my clients through a process of really tapping in to that plantness, because from your plantness, you make the best decisions. It doesn't mean you don't act. So you know from your plantness, you can jump into your animalness, or you can see the conditioning that's coming from your humanness. But from here, at least I know that I am making decisions and moving from a place of taking it all in rather than running away from it.
Presence. You are hit the nail on the head there, because we run from one thing to another, even in just our daily lives where we have appointments or we have to get a person to another location. And so you're constantly in motion, and find that there is not a lot of opportunity for stillness in how our societies are structured, particularly as being still in the difficult things is hard as a human being. To be present, to observe before reacting. And that truly resonated when you said that plantness allows that stillness to be in it and not running
Hmm.
from it,
Hmm.
so that you can, I guess, address a situation with more intelligence and more self-awareness than what we would if a crisis hits and you're go, go, go. And it's not until you sit and then it hits you like a 10-ton truck. You're
Right.
not in that moment. And I guess many of us feel that relentless pressure to push harder, control every outcome, and get things right. There's this pressure that we should have it all in hand, especially for caregivers and multi-passionates. And I'm wondering, how do plants model an alternative way of being? What lessons do they offer about flowing backwards and forwards, the ease of connection and collaboration that helps break these truly exhausting cycles that we get ourselves caught in, just from how society is run?
This is one of the other pieces that I think has been so revolutionary in our understanding of where did we go wrong as humans. Humans, to a certain extent, we want to think of ourselves as these really complex beings, but in the end, we just rely on a lot of our animal instincts without really thinking them through and what it is it does. So like you said, that go-go culture became part of our norm, where as beings of nature, we're seasonal. We have moments like right now, you're in the spring, I'm in the autumn. You're in the middle of like moving things forward. The weather is good, like the heat is starting to come in. And even that has its moments of an arc in the day. Come from a culture of siesta, and because it is very hot. And so we go through and we have these cycles that are both daily cycles, monthly cycles, and yearly cycles. And when we separated and we started to think of this go-go culture, we decided to cut those out, like the idea of rest. And this is something that when you look at an ecosystem of any sort, rest is an integral part of it. And the mentality that resting is actually wasting time, we cheat ourselves out of one of the most restorative pieces of ourselves and one of the pieces that is most important for our own resilience, because rest is both recovery, right? Like absolute rest, but also, for example, for me in the fall, right now, being in the autumn period is a time for me to bring in my nourishment, to evaluate, not so much reflect yet, because that's more the winter period, but start bringing in all the nourishment that helps me. What is it that was useful to me throughout the year, and start letting the other pieces fall away. And one thing we start to learn when we work deeply with plants is looking at an ecosystem. You have one part, the seasonality. When is my period of rest, and how does that rest affect me, and what kind of rest is it? When do I need restorative rest? When do I need reflective rest? When do I need nurture gathering type rest so that I can understand what it is that I need to bring out, so it's more of a productive rest? When do I need to bring this back in so that then by the time the spring comes around, I'm actually ready to really spring into action, rather than the fact that I'm kind of going monotone the entire way of the year and I'm I'm actually just exhausted all the time. So one of the ways that ecosystems teach us is how do these cycles and then to follow them. I'll give you an example that's very practical that I use myself. I tend to wake up relatively early. I'm extremely productive, happy, in love with the world in the morning when I get up, so much so that it takes me from the time that I wake up to the time I actually sit at my computer. I spend about 3 hours between exercise, journaling, getting ready. Like it is my time and I am in love with the world. I start working. I am ridiculously productive, but ridiculously productive in things that are strategic, things that have to get done. I have very specific types of things that I'm very, very good at in the morning. Lunchtime hits, which for me is relatively later than it is for most. I'm kind of got that Spanish, I'm Cuban, so I've got this like Cuban blood in me. So it's a little bit later. And afterwards, I am useless. Useless. If I don't take a nap, if I don't have siesta, I am ridiculous. Like I eat with a lot of calm. I cook. Cooking is my downtime from that up. I then I cook, I eat, and I siesta. And then I take all my client calls in my afternoon because that's when I can't do any kind of strategic work. I love to listen. That is when I am your bestest friend in the world. I am the number one coach in the afternoon. And then my evening has to be restorative. It has to help me restore, whether that's spending time with friends, or that is doing something very like luscious for myself before I go to sleep. So that cycle for some people, if I was to describe it, people would be like, how do you get any work done? But yet anybody who knows me, the question they're asked me is, do you ever sleep? I sleep, by the way. I definitely sleep. But they're always like, you get so much done in a day. And for me, it feels almost lazy because there is so much rest. There is so much personal care in there. And it's the plants that taught me that. I never did that before. The plants said, watch your rhythm. And I literally spent months writing down my energy levels at every period of the day and what I was most productive of to figure out that this is my schedule. I am this person. And if I honor it, I am ridiculously productive with no discipline and with no difficulty at all. So plants really help us understand how ecosystems come together, starting with your own personal and then going out from there. How do I create relationships? What do those relationships look like when I throw out all the human limiting labels like love and family, and I start to get to what is the relationship really between myself and this person? And I amplify that because plants, obviously, again, being sessile, relationships are extremely important. So you start to see the world in a wider perspective. You start to recognize, what does it mean to be a predator? What does it mean to be a parasite? When is it that I'm actually don't really care what you do and I'm just going to be there for you regardless of whether or not you care about me? Like there's all kinds of different relationships that we judge as human beings, that we limit, that make our lives miserable because they don't fit into the social norms that we've been taught. Like a client of mine who was talking to me today about how in the past, when we first started to work together, her relationships were transactional. Like if you didn't give me something, I was supposed to withhold something from you. When instead we started working with a more natural approach, now she has all kinds of different relationships, which seen from the outside could be whatever. But for her, they all have their way of working out because they're all natural relationships. They're all based on what it is that's happening with these other people, places, things, objects, work, all kinds of different aspects. An ecosystem and working closely with plants, to sum it up in an easier way, is it takes us out of the human conditioned logic, the one where society tells you you're supposed to do something on an automatic, and it allows you to remember that as a being of nature, you can make a choice. And once you make a choice, even if your choice is to run away, going back to the running away example, it's your choice. Therefore, it's easier for you to take responsibility, for you to actually enjoy the running. It's easier for you to come back when it's time for you to come back because you made the decision consciously rather than doing it as a reaction to something. You didn't run away. You actually were running towards something different.
Extremely profound way of looking at relationships with oneself, with another person. I've never thought of it like that before. Although in our day-to-day lives, it's never positioned or propositioned in that way. And it's definitely questioning the status quo. It's definitely going, hang on a second, that makes sense. Because what we want to achieve is a flow of happiness, a flow of positive energy. And when we're just in the grind of day to day, we're not conscious of those things. And you were talking so effectively about being strategically ticking off your list and being up and doing all of these amazing self-care elements to set yourself up for true success from the get-go. And it's so interesting about our rhythms, because everybody's rhythm is slightly different. So say, for example, you wake at 4 a.m., but then maybe your best friend wakes at 10 because they function better at nighttime. And it's just an interesting thought process for finding your own rhythm, for being present in your own self. And also, I think the other element is that this ecosystem that you're talking about makes such sense, that teaching our little ones at an early age so that once they become adults, they already have these practices in place for loving oneself enough to set the time. Because as in caregiving, we give so much of ourselves to ensure that another person has the love, care, support, the resilience, the advocacy that we really feel at times strapped for time, presence. And self-care is something that I strongly advocate around non-negotiable. It's a non-negotiable to be present with oneself, to fill up our cup. And from what I'm hearing is that your work is challenging the usual productivity hacks by encouraging us to think about ecosystems. How can seeing ourselves and our projects as living ecosystems really transform how we approach being creative and also looking at personal growth?
I'm glad that you asked that question, because I wanted to also tie it to something you were just saying relating to children. One of the most difficult things that we as human beings kind of experience, and especially as adults, we do this a lot, is that when you know yourself and you see that everything that I am, in both its constructive ways and its destructive ways,
Yes.
is actually natural. I can use any one of my skills to build something up, and I can also use that exact same skill to break something down. And one is not positive or negative. The value of positive or negative is based on what value does it bring to the ecosystem in that moment. I could do the exact same thing in a constructive way, and it could be super positive, and I can do it in a constructive way in another moment in time, and it could be totally negative. So negativity and positivity is not an absolute that is like, oh, when you're judgmental, you're always negative. No. Judgment can be really positive, or it can be very negative. When you start to think of yourself in that perspective, which is a natural approach, working with the plants have always helped me understand the range of my skills and talents and characteristics rather than the prescribed. Remember, I was saying that, like, stepping out and looking at it as an ecosystem, it's more of how aware am I of what's going on in the ecosystem so that I can plug that in the right way. So it sort of naturally pushes me to, one, accept myself, so I can find authenticity, and two, be aware of what's going on in my ecosystem so that I know where to plug it in that particular moment. And that changes based on the dynamics that was happening. And this is something that teaching children, especially at a very young age, becomes extremely important for two reasons. One, we tend to rely on discipline from the perspective of artificial discipline on the outside. We also tend to rely on many, many different rules. Our society is based on the law in general. And if you go to look at law books, my goodness, the amount of rules we have in there of all these things. When you look at instead some of the most complex things in nature, it's based on a principle called simple rules or deep patterns. Most complex things in nature, for example, birds swarming or fish that are also moving in schools, all of these things are based on very simple rules, usually only one or two of them. For example, birds swarm, and the way that they can move, that they all look like this harmonious piece and they're not crashing into one another, is because they have one rule. The distance between their wings and the distance between the next bird over should be a certain size. Yeah. And as long as they're always moving to keep that distance, they don't crash into one another. So when children are taught, let me put a rule in for every single thing, but thinking of a deep pattern that creates a simple rule. One of the examples that often gets used in biomimicry for social innovation, which I think is a beautiful one, was a school where they gave children 3 rules. Rule number 1, take care of yourself. In other words, you have a voice in saying, if I feel sick, if somebody hurt me, always take care of yourself and make that known. So you can go up to a teacher and say, I have a cold and I want to go home. That's taking care of myself. So number 2, take care of your other schoolmates. So if you see a bully, you go and you talk. I don't have to have a rule that says no bullying because my rule is take care of my fellow students. If I see something happening, I tattletale because the rule is take care of the others. If I can do something for somebody else, I do it. I don't have to have separate rules for all these things. I have a deep pattern, which is similar to that. Keep the distance of the birds. This is my rule. And the third one, take care of your school. In other words, kids naturally took off their shoes. They naturally didn't draw on the walls. They naturally didn't do destructive things because the most important rule was take care of my school because the school takes care of me. And since I'm number 1 rule and I have to be taken care of, I have to take care of myself. And I know that my schoolmates are taking care of me because I'm taking care of them. 3 rules that completely do away with long lists of memorized discipline rules that we give things. So what happens when I only have things like that, like those 3 rules, which is how an ecosystem, everything else is experimentation and creativity. Everything else becomes free reign. I now have space. Do I want to wear a purple sweater? Does my purple sweater hurt one of these 3 rules? No, because I'm taking care of me. It doesn't hurt somebody else, and the school doesn't have a problem. I'm going to wear my purple sweater. And I'm going to wear it with green shoes and a fuzzy hat because that's how I express my creativity, and it doesn't violate any of those 3 rules. So when we look at nature, that's the reason why there's such an amazing expression of creativity in nature, because nature basically has very, very simple rules that traverse through everything, doesn't need anything, and therefore I have space for mutation, experimentation, elongation, going into other areas. If a tulip who normally flowers yellow flowers put out a purple flower, you would think it's the coolest thing ever. Where because we have all these social norms that say you're supposed to behave, when somebody dyes their hair purple, their instinct sometimes is like, what the hell are you doing? And it's like, wait a minute, why don't you just say it's super cool? My point being is when we start to reflect back this idea that I'm interconnected, so I am thinking about you, when my purple sweater would conflict because we're doing, I don't know, a school photo, and everybody is like, we're doing this school photo and we're going to do this theme. And now all of a sudden, if I wear a purple sweater, it clashes with taking care of everybody else because we're trying to do this thing together, then I won't wear my purple sweater because I don't want to hurt anybody else on my side. But when it's normal day, I'm going to wear my purple sweater because it doesn't hurt anybody. So looking at ourselves and being in relationship, we would think is more restrictive, but it's actually not. It's actually much more liberating. And in that liberation, I give myself then permission to explore and experiment. And that's where the creativity comes from. That's where my mind doesn't have to memorize all these rules and be hidden and be like hindered by all these rules. I give myself now space to just go and explore into all these different directions.
Yes, because when we look at here in Australia, when you go to school, they have like principles, being kind to others, but there are so many rules for little ones to remember, yet alone when you become an adult. And if anybody is in a space where they have a neurospicy individual who is expressive and they have their own way of looking at the world, those restrictive rules and guidelines, you have to sit in your chair for 6 hours unless I give you permission to go to the toilet. And that's where conflict arises because there isn't this ebb and flow between understanding of a person. There is no ability for flexibility and learning. And you're so correct in the fact that we have 4 rules here at home because they're simple to remember. They're
Right.
simple to understand. It applies to, it might be to show respect to yourself, respect to somebody else and your environment. Now, that means we don't damage anybody, we don't put our hands on anybody.
Right.
There is a meaning behind it, but it's simple.
Right.
It was so profound then when you were talking about the difference in nature and seeing birds flying together and then going to mechanical, like for example, the Air Force, when they're flying planes together. It's the same principle of a simple rule. You have to have this much space so that we
Right.
don't go and blow up. And we don't look at it like that as a society. There are so many hierarchies in our world. It's so rigid. There's no flow. And you're right. When you're with littlies, there's no holding back. Do you know what I mean? They say what they think, and they might walk past someone and have never seen a tattoo before. Say like nobody in their family has a tattoo and they walk past someone who is covered in tattoos. When you were talking about the two differences, like you can have a positive and you can have the same situation and create a negative. As an adult, we may approach that in a completely different mindset from our upbringing, from the rules that we may have had in our home. And it's so powerful to think of it as being able to have the same situation and choose the way in which we want to interact. So rather than it being, my God, why would you do that to your body? It's Mom, like how amazing is that picture of that dragon on his shoulder? Or
Right.
it's more wonder. And as
It
we
is
get older,
wonder.
I feel like we lose that wonder because we have to follow all of these structures and rules and etiquette. And not that, you don't want to be kind, compassionate, but sometimes you meet people and you're just blown away by how angry they are because of the circumstances in which they have been raised. And there isn't that ability for ebb and flow, or they haven't healed, or they're afraid to dive in deep for themselves. And so those limiting beliefs and the shame that can weigh heavily on our growth, and we want to reflect what we would love for our loved ones to have. Kindness, compassion, generosity without needing something in return. Just being there to show love and gratitude. Drawing from plant wisdom, how can we transform those tough emotions into fertile ground for renewal and expansion when we have those constraints of society?
That wonder that you just talked about, there's a few different elements. One is that wonder that you talked about. Wonder cuts through everything. Because like you said, when a child asks a question, the reason you're so open to answering it is because it is coming from a place of wonder. And if you, even as an adult, approach that place from that same idea, or from the ability of saying, hey, I'm actually feeling this thing. How do I deal with it? So you're coming at it with an openness to the question, then that, of course, opens you to dialogue, and that's what allows you to dialogue. And so it is kind of that same perspective. Again, when you go back to the plants, we start to understand, and the more you work with plants as collaborators and as partners, you realize that there's this beautiful spectrum of who I am, right? Any characteristic I have has this spectrum, and everything about me is natural. So therefore, I don't have to approach it from judgment. I can approach it from genuine curiosity. I remember talking about tattoos, like my mother has a tendency to ask, my friends and partners that I've brought home with her questions that for somebody else might be embarrassing or offensive even. Like I had some that have had tattoos or piercings, and my mother has asked them. But my mother comes from it from a place of wonder, and it's beautiful to watch the conversation that develops, because her question is more like, I'd love to hear, like, what made you put a needle in that spot? Like, I just can't fathom it. But she doesn't say, like, you're wrong in doing it. She's just genuinely curious. Like, why did you put a needle there and think that was okay? Because for me, that would be terrifying, right?
Yeah.
So that opens to a dialogue that then allows an expression of each party, and you can then learn from one one another. And when it comes to kind of some of these beliefs that we in society have created, most often many of these beliefs, especially the ones that are what we call limiting beliefs or these impositions, are based off of fear, either because something has happened, you've had some trauma, and therefore you built a belief around that to protect you from it, or because of the belief that something would happen. Somebody told you that if you kept acting that way, you wouldn't be able to do something else, or the very famous, if you keep eating, nobody's going to love you and you're never going to find a partner and you're never going to be happy and you're going to be miserable and all these things. So what happens, you build up a limiting belief to the fact that like your body shape is very much tied to whether or not you can be loved. You build up these types of patterns. But again, when you think about nature, we have this thing called beautiful thing that in nature is easier to see, especially in plants than it is in humans, called epigenetics, which is this whole concept of the fact that there's a lot more power in our gene structure, and there are genes that we can turn on and off. Especially as plants, we see this very, very directly, which means a plant can say, okay, this year, this thing happened. Sun came up really early. I got really burned. So you know what? I'm going to turn on these genes in order to ensure that next year that doesn't happen. But if next year the sun doesn't come up the same, the plant says, okay, so 2 years ago, this happened. And this year, this happened. So I'm going to do it this way and I'm going to test. And I'm going to kind of like be ready in a middle of the road sort of perspective. Why? Because the plant consciously made the decision as to which genes to turn on and off. We, on the other hand, have a tendency to build these beautiful little living beliefs and these belief systems of like, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, all these types of things. And then we put a little guardian at the door and say, you're the one that's going to make sure that I never experience what's behind you because I can't handle it, because I've been told over and over again. So I'm unlovable, and any trait that makes me lovable, all the things about me that make me lovable, hide them behind there because I've been told that I'm unlovable and therefore. And then you know what we do? We forget. We forget we put the guardian there. And so therefore, when I'm looking for all my lovable traits, I'm like, why the hell am I unlovable? Like, I can't figure it out. And it's like, there's like a little guardian a little bodyguard standing at the door going, I know why. You told me to stand here. I'm not letting anybody else in. I'm not letting anybody see that part of you that's like sweet and squishy and cute and can do all these amazing things. Nope, 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 nope. You told me I was supposed to block that. I'm going to block it. Nature doesn't act that way. Nature is constantly shuffling around, turning things on, turning things off, playing around with it. So what we have to do is create a relationship with that little bodyguard and say, hey, you know what, bodyguard? I need you to turn these things on in these conditions and turn these things off in these conditions. Can you do that? Can you and I have a relationship? It always goes back to relationships. Ultimately, the heart of everything we learn is relationships, and even relationship to self that, again, is not based on judgment, but based on wonder. You were talking earlier about neurospiciness, which is me and all of my clients, because I work mainly with multi-potentialites, multi-passionates, mostly neurodivergent. What we work on the most is within my bubble, I can do things however the hell I want. If I want to have 17 paper to-do list, 4 online, and 15 that are chalkboards around my house, because that's what works for me, and my mind is able to process all of those, great. Beautiful. Have them. You need to figure out any system that works for you. If you want to get dressed by putting your clothes out the day before, if you want to instead wash your clothes every single day because that's the way your neurospiciness works, I don't actually care. I want to embrace that. I want to give you full permission to be within your bubble, whatever it is that works for the way that your mind works.
Yeah.
Then once you get comfortable and completely accept that this is who you are, and that as I'm sitting on my desk, I have, again, 4 paper lists. On my computer, I have 2. I also have on my fridge a list. I have to-do lists in many different ways because my brain thinks of different things in different ways. Some in pen, some in pencil, some with a dry erase marker, some with digital. That's the way I get a lot of shit done. Because I have all these different lists. But I would never impose my list on you.
Yeah.
What I would do is, you tell me what kind of way you follow things. Then I know the way I follow things. We're both right in our own little fiefdoms. And so then we have to just build a bridge in between us that allows us to work in a way that fits that. So let me ask you a bunch of questions that don't come from judgment, but that come from really trying to understand how you work.
Yeah.
You do like what I write in pencil, you write in pen. Okay, I get it. What I write digitally, you write also digitally. Great. Here we've got one that we can do it digitally. You over here do this one in dry erase on a whiteboard. I'm going to send you pictures of the, like, you can work it all out when you accept that I have these things about me, you have these things about you. Because again, that's how an ecosystem works, right? Two plants who need to communicate need to figure out what do they have in common and what are they separate and where is it that I can give you and what is it that you can take and vice versa. And it's a constant shuffle. Maybe in this time of the year, it's this way. And then it shifts over in another time of the year. Douglas firs and what's the other plant? I was going to say a birch, but I'm not sure if it's a birch. Permit me for saying that I'm going to use a birch as the example, but it might not be a birch. But basically, throughout the course of a year, right, there is a time of year where being a conifer, like there is a time of year where the Douglas fir feeds over to the birch because the Douglas fir is still photosynthesizing, is still making, nutrients, is still, and then there's another period of the year where it goes backwards. Why? Because they both have strengths in different parts of the year and in different kinds of climate. So based on the climate, they negotiate who's going to be the dominant one. It's not, I'm always the special. It's, I've got more than you've got right now, so I'm going to give you some. And so when we start looking at how all these different kinds of relationships develop, how cells work, how plants actually talk to one another, how do they interact with other species, we start seeing all these models that have built up this amazing world we live in and say to ourselves, they don't seem to be as stressed out as we are. Maybe I can learn something there.
Definitely. I think that's such an empowering reframing of how we look at the ebb and flow and how one person can have a very specific structure to how another person might, and being able to be open to accepting without judgment another person's perspective on life, on how they are able to do the same powerful things that you are, just in a different, unique, like it could be just slight tweaks, but could be monumentally left field to how you may have thought or processed. And for caregivers who may carry invisible scars or guilt, can you talk to me about what practical mind shifts or first steps that you would suggest to commence this healing journey?
Yeah, I would say that besides the fact that first and foremost, spending time with other beings of nature. So in any shape or form, I have a very deep relationship with grass. As a matter of fact, I did a whole episode of my podcast all about my relationship with grass because grass is ubiquitous. Grass is everywhere. And we know about the effects of like the electromagnetic field, earthing, grounding. There's so many pieces connected to this. So one thing I would say that is give yourself space and permission to have a relationship with even a single plant. Like I have very specific plants that I work with on very specific things, many of which are my house plants. They're house plants. They live with me. They're my house roommates. Like we have very specific relationships. And first of all, changes my physiology because that shared breath brings me into a more calming. There's volatile organic compounds that are being sent out by, for example, Gary the silver fir right outside my window. So just stepping out onto my balcony and taking a nice deep breath, I take in chemicals and these compounds that automatically start to bring down my cortisol levels, that actually lower my depression. People who live in neighborhoods where like vacant lots have been overgrown by grasses have been shown to self-reported depression levels that drop by sometimes as much as like 40 to 50%. So just giving yourself that space to like sit with a houseplant, no matter who it is, right? A spider plant, a dracaena, an aloe, and just breathing in and feeling that connection between you in a very simple, practical way is already enough to start to first bring down all those defenses. We also feel more altruistic and more generous in nature because again, what science is now studying is what is this awe and wonder, because we know that that's the key for many people into curiosity and into healing. So that already starts to move us towards that openness. And don't think that there's like, oh, well, I don't have, whatever park nearby or woods. You don't need to go that far. If you can't get out to the grass, again, a house plant is perfect. Sit with the house plant, close your eyes for a second, eliminate that dominant sense of ourselves, and just breathe. And so that opens up already, like I said, depression levels that drop, cortisol levels that drop. So my stress drops, my altruism goes up, my generosity to self as well as to others starts to go up. And so especially in a caregiver situation, that's one piece that is extremely important to know that that's a tool that you can use. That relationship with that plant will really help you. And also another thing that another client of mine once said to me that I thought was fantastic, she was saying how she has this tree in front of her house that as she comes home, if she's in a bad mood, she goes to this tree and she gives the tree her shit. In other words, she just unloads. This is actually an Australian client, so it's kind of funny. She unloads everything because what is fertilizer made out of?
Yeah, of course. Manure.
Exactly. So for her, she's like, and energetically, I give it because I know that this plant can recycle it all. And so when you sit with a house plant and you just like unload everything, that plant is recycling it. They're recycling the toxins that are coming out of your breath. They're recycling also parts that are coming out of your body. They're recycling those mental processes. We still don't know exactly how, but we know it's happening. And that helps start to bring you into it. And it opens the field to these wider discussions that we've been having about looking at it from an ecosystem perspective, going into what your limiting beliefs are and befriending those guardians so that you can start to work on those beliefs, stepping into these deeper relationships that are based on respect and, like you said, gratitude and acceptance, and then being able to see and find solutions from there. So just that simple act of taking a moment with this being and allowing that my own sense of self as a being of nature to kind of reflect back to me already opens the path for me to start having it. Plus, where does all of our medicine come from? Plants. Where is it that all of what we think of as our wellness comes from? Plants. So every time we do this, we're actually activating all these natural killer cells in our body. We're really training ourselves to step into a state of wellness and therefore to look at anything that might be a trauma or an injury or a belief or anything with, again, that curiosity that then allows me to step in and find that reframe that might be necessary or what it is that I need to do in order to heal it.
When you were talking just before about communicating with a plant and its capacity to reprocess what we're providing because it absorbs those nutrients when we feed our plants, and that every day we're interacting with plants in one way, shape or form, whether it be through the food that we eat, whether it be through the supplements or the medications that we need to provide, whether it be through materials that we have to use if we're having to dress wounds. When you're sunburnt, we use aloe vera, which is a beautiful plant. And I'm deeply intrigued by your work. You were talking earlier about plant-composed music. Can you share how this unique musical form influences mental and physical well-being, and how might my listeners and their loved ones incorporate this healing tool into their daily self-care routines?
The music of the plants, as I said at the very beginning, is a device that my community started working on in the late 1970s. And it's a device that really at the time we thought we were kind of eavesdropping on the way plants were doing things. So the way the device works, it's kind of a biofeedback device. It allows us to use the electrical signals. So just the same as our synapses are firing with small electrical charges, plants also use electrical signaling in order to move information through their bodies. So this taps into that through two sensors that get connected to the plant. And then these get transformed into notes of music. There's an algorithm that then the plant starts to hear and then can start to tune. So the more I play my instrument, the more I learn how to master my instrument. The more they play with the music of the plant's device, the more they get to master this. And the interesting part was that as we started, there was many different pieces, which I won't go into right now. There's tons of information on my website and such because there's just really so much. But one of the things that we started to notice was this healing aspect on so many different levels. We found that people who listened to plant music actually experienced healing effects, so much so that I did a study on the effects of plant music on human health. And with very small protocols that you can play with based on whatever other healing modalities, for those of you that are healers, or for example, we've seen it used in hospitals, we've seen it used in physical therapy centers to accelerate. And this is kind of based on the principle in the study that was done. It was an accident. It was a fluke. But basically, a surgeon started to realize that his patients in the ICU that had a window that led to outside and they could see a tree or a plant of some sort, mostly a tree in that case when the study was first done, actually markedly healed faster. In other words, they recovered from surgery faster than those that were in an indoor space that they didn't have a window. And since then, this phenomenon of being able to be immersed in nature, if you notice, many hospitals now will have gardens. They will have really beautiful manicured areas where the idea that you can get out or you can at least look out the window and see it, because there is a growing body of studies and of information around this phenomenon. And the music of the plants seems to accelerate it because it adds the music perspective to that. So you have the plant being able to express themselves and tune that expression to your needs, because again, the music is live. So the plant changes the music based on what it is. There's a growing body of evidence that plants actually can also create healing for you when they have a relationship. I had a wonderful doctor shaman on my podcast who was explaining that it doesn't really matter. Yes, it is true that there are certain plants that are better for certain kinds of healings, but if you have a relationship with a plant, that plant wants to create things for you and wants to help you heal in whatever it is that you're experiencing. And we found the same thing with the music of the plants. When you work with one plant for a long period of time, we've seen studies on coma patients, we've seen studies on people who have blood issues, hypothyroidism, also diabetes, we've seen hypertension. We're basically working with a plant and the music. It's kind of like you got this double whammy. You've got a plant that wants to give you their healing, and then the music that also triggers a frequency response in you. And these two together seems to accelerate the healing process. And it's something that you can do at home, because the music of the plants device, which you can go to my website, it's just my website / which is my full name, Tigrilla Gardenia / music of the plants. And you can then get access to being able to purchase a music of the plants device no matter where you are. It's such an amazing piece, because as a person who is a plant communicator, but who first started communicating through that music and then now has worked with them, it's just so obvious that this is what the plant, they're like, finally, you're listening to us. Like, we're here. We're your partners. We're building this world together. We want you to be healthy, because when you're healthy, you do good things. And so therefore, we want to make sure that you're healthy, because you've got skills, you've got arms and legs that we don't have. You can do things that I need you to do, like set a fire or, take care of the land in a certain way. I need you to be able to do that. So I need to keep you healthy.
Indeed. Yes, we like keeping everybody healthy.
Keeping everybody healthy.
That's right. And those insights, and now that you've said them, like at the Children's Hospital here in Queensland, it's located in Brisbane, and they have dedicated spaces that they have cultivated on multiple levels that patients can be wheeled to, taken to outside, where they have entire walls of plants, depending on where it is, or ground cover. And they dedicate time for it to be nurtured, for it to be cared for, and altering it so it's a different experience. So, because when you're unwell and you're in hospital, it's scary.
It is.
There's lots of things that happen that cause trauma to a child and even adults by not necessarily the procedure that they're having, but the path forward to completing that procedure, and the need for outdoors, the need to escape and to be at peace. And so no matter when we're there, we go into these spaces because it just sets the tone for a better outcome than what we would have experienced if I just said to them, hey, we're going to go and have this procedure done. And then they're all like, no, why?
Right.
Because little ones don't understand. They don't have the cognitive capacity. So it's so beautiful that you brought that through, because we're noticing with new buildings here in Brisbane and here on the Sunshine Coast, they're actively planting cascading greenery down the sides of building every other level to kind of re-bring in more of nature so that the concrete cities have more abundance of filtration and ability to walk outside, because most multi-story high-rise buildings don't have that. So seeing a lot of shopping centres do this so that every level, like you actually have to walk past the plants to keep going around in that state.
Right.
So I wanted to bring all of these beautiful nuggets of gold that you've shared with us today into everyday life for us juggling caregivers, workers, and personal passions. Can you give me what is simple and a practical step that listeners can take to live more in tune with their true nature through plant-inspired practices?
Yeah, the one I would provide that I feel like is just so simple is pick a plant, any plant. Most likely the plant's already chosen you, you'll know, and just spend, even if it's just 1 minute a day, one conscious minute a day. So again, we have 5 main senses. The plants have those same 5 senses. They also have many others, and I believe we also have many others, but let's just go with the same 5 and use those senses. Whether you just spend a minute in looking, and when I mean looking, I mean really looking. Look around the base. If it's a pot plant, look at the base. Where is it that the plant starts to grow up? Are there leaves that are dying and leaves that are alive? Is there a pattern? Is there not just use that. And then maybe the next day, spend a minute using a different sense. Smell, breathe, start that breathing pattern that I said. That deep breath and feeling like you're taking in their oxygen and letting out your carbon dioxide and recognizing that actually you guys need each other. So in that circular breath, 1 minute of breathing. The next day, maybe just touch the pot. Touch the leaves, go in and touch the soil. Is there moisture? Is there not? Like, use the back of your hand, use your cheek. Don't just touch with your fingers, touch with your different parts of your body. Use all these different senses to just start to form a relationship. Everything else will come from there. But even if you just take 1 minute, just one, a day. If you're sitting at your desk, when you first sit at your desk and you have a pot plant that's sitting on your desk, or on your way to work, that tree that's right outside, or maybe as you come home from work, take your shoes off and put your feet on the grass for 1 minute. Look at grass. Grass is amazing. Spending that 1 minute, first of all the things that we talked about relating to stress, depression. 2, your senses get exalted. All of a sudden now my senses are much more than I expected them to be. And 3, that feeling of connection. I am not alone. I'm always around these other beautiful beings. And therefore, these other beings are also around me. We're here for each other. You're never alone. 1 minute. Just
one intentional minute.
One intentional minute.
In-depth minute where you are actively present. And I use the 5 senses a lot because it helps us in panic. It helps us to feel stable because it gives us something to hone in on. It gives our mind something to be
inattentive, in space, attentive. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm after. Exactly. So I wanted to thank you so much for sharing these rich, inspiring insights. Before we close, is there one powerful message you'd love to leave with our listeners seeking more flow, authenticity, and resilience in their radiant moments?
Yeah, I would say that the most important aspect is everything that you are, no matter how ugly or strange or whatever you think it is all natural. And if you learn where it fits into the ecosystem, I guarantee you will feel yourself a part of nature and you will naturally just connect back into others around you.
I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us, for illuminating the path towards living in harmony with our natural rhythms and purpose. To our listeners, if you feel a calling to explore your spirit wild plant and embark on this transformative nature-inspired journey, please go and visit What's Your Spirit's Wild Plant on Tigilla's website, and I'll put all of the links below so that you can connect with her. Until next time, please take care of your gentle, radiant moments